All right, is that coming through?
Yep, we can say it.
Awesome. All right. So, yeah, thank you all so much for coming along tonight. I am absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to present to the DC Power Platform Group. I've lived in Auckland, New Zealand for the last 18 years, but I'm actually from the Baltimore, Washington area originally. I grew up outside of Baltimore. I went to college in Washington, D.C. So I feel like I'm getting the chance to present to my hometown crowd. So thank you all so much for having me along tonight. We're gonna be talking about Power Effects and all the new stuff that you can do with it in the Power Platform. So yeah, really excited to go through that tonight. But before we get into Power Effects, I want to share something. I learned this yesterday. It absolutely fascinated me. Hip hop and disco music are literally the same age. Now, that's probably going to make you ask two questions. Firstly, really, and secondly, what on earth does this have to do with Power Effects, Nathan? But we'll get to that in a second. But disco music was very popular in the 70s. Artists like Donna Summer and Gloria Gaynor made it kind of a big deal, and disco was all the rage. And yet, at the same time, while no one was looking, in the neighborhoods around New York City, hip hop was also in the process of being invented. This is DJ Kool Herc. He's credited with the invention of hip hop. Now, what's really interesting is that no one cared. Everyone was focused on hip hop, on disco, and hip hop was just in the background. Most people had never heard of it. If they had heard of it, they thought this is probably never going to amount to anything. But then something incredible happened. If we fast forward to today, this is a representation of the top streaming categories for music. And you'll notice two really interesting things about this chart. The first thing is that the single largest category is hip hop. And the second thing is that disco doesn't appear anywhere on this chart. Now, I had ChatGPT put this together for me, so the numbers are subject to debate, but I just think it's absolutely fascinating that two forms of music invented about the same time, one of which completely in the background, completely ignored, went on to become the biggest thing today, while the other one, disco, that was a big deal at the time, has faded into obscurity. And again, you're probably asking, firstly, that's really interesting, Nathan. I wonder why. And secondly, what on earth does this have to do with Power Effects? So I've got like 2 minutes before I'm out of here. All right. So what's really cool about this is that hip hop democratized the creative process. You see, in the world of disco, you needed musicians and studios and producers, whereas in the world of hip hop, all you needed was a turntable and a mic, two things readily accessible and in possession of a lot of people in the 1970s. And I want you to keep this idea in the back of your mind as we're going through our time together today, is that Power FX is the hip hop of the Power Platform. Because, like hip hop, all you needed was a turntable and a mic. With Power FX in the Power Platform, all you need is Excel to create amazing things. And so we've got DJ Power Effects to guide us through our time together today. Kia ora, as Aidan said, I'm Nathan Rose, and Power Effects is my love language. And I hope by the end of our time together, you love it as much as I do. I'm a solution architect at Olympic 33, based in beautiful Auckland, New Zealand, although I've been back home in the States over the past few weeks visiting family for the holidays in the Baltimore, Washington area. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in business applications. As my fellow MVP, Mary Myers, is fond of saying, how do you know someone's a Microsoft MVP? Don't worry, we'll tell you. And I've kind of become the Power Effects guy over the last few years. I've really deep dived into Power Effects, and I absolutely love it and am really excited to share my passion with you all today. And my mission is to unleash human creativity via the Power Platform in low code. Now, a quick overview of the time that we're going to spend together today. So we're going to start out by looking at what makes Power Effects unique among software development languages. We'll then cover off where you can use it, and then we'll get hands-on with it. And I'll show you some of the newest places where you can use it in the Power Platform. Dataverse, Copilot Studio, Power Pages, and the command line interface. We won't focus too much on Power Apps, Canvas apps, and calculated columns, as those have been GA for a while, and I feel like they're pretty well understood. So we'll focus on some of the newer aspects of it, and we'll wrap up with Q&A. I absolutely love Q&A. It's my favorite part of these sessions. I get my best ideas and content from the questions that you all ask, so I can't wait for your questions. And I love for these sessions to be as interactive as possible. So if at any point in time you have a question, a comment, something you don't understand, something you don't agree with, feel free to come off mute and we'll chat about it. Alternatively, if you prefer to pop your comment in the chat, that's cool too. I don't have ready access to it while I'm presenting through the slides. So Aiden or Jamie, if you guys wouldn't mind, if there's a comment in there that you think I need to address, just come off mute and let me know, and we can talk about it. All right, let's get straight into low code. So the announcements from Microsoft have late. If we look past the Gen AI and the Copilot stuff, and read between the lines into some of the Power Platform announcements that we've seen in the Wave 1 and 2 announcements at Ignites and at Build, have felt a little bit like this. There has been an outpouring of Power Effects everywhere across the Power Platform. We're seeing it pop up everywhere, from Copilot Studio to Power Pages to Dataverse, and it begs the question, what's going on here? What is so unique about it? Why is it showing up everywhere? Well, firstly, we need to think about, what is Power Effects? If you're new to the Power Platform, you may not be familiar with it, or if you work in other parts of it, Power Automate, Power BI, you may not be as familiar with Power Effects. But Power Effects is Microsoft's low-code formula-based love language that's used to customize the Power Platform. You heard that correct. I said it's a love language. I absolutely love it. And these traits are what make Power Effects so incredibly lovable. It's open source. It's comprised of human-friendly commands that can be used by everyone from makers to pro devs. It's strong typed and declarative. Now, if you are a low coder like myself, you might not be familiar with those terms. Don't worry, I'm going to explain them shortly. It's always live. It works just like Excel. And it's one language to rule them all. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a bit. But firstly, we need to explore the world into which Power Effects was born. As many of you are probably aware, we have a global shortfall of software developers that's tipped to reach anywhere from the tens to the hundreds of millions in the coming years. Basically, we need a lot more software than we have people available to create it. And so some clever people at Microsoft spent some time pondering this, because in every crisis, there is an equal and opposite opportunity. And so they realized we need billions of software developers to create all the software that we need for our companies, for our countries, for our organizations. And the reality is that if we try to put everybody through a computer science degree or through a coding boot camp, that just isn't going to scale. We need a lot more software faster than we can train people to build it. But they came to an interesting conclusion. They realized that they have billions of users of Excel worldwide. Now, you might be asking, what on earth does Excel have to do with creating business applications? But the reality is that Excel is often used as a pseudo business application. Those of us in Power Platform land find this all the time. We're brought in to replace the spreadsheet with Dataverse and Power Apps because at its core, Excel has a rudimentary database. You can create tables with rows and columns. There are commands that let you automate and do things in Excel, and so it is often used as a pseudo business application. And so the team at Microsoft concluded that if creating apps worked just like Excel, we've instantly created billions of software developers. We've solved the problem. And so PowerFX is only 3 years old. It was first announced in November 2021 at the Ignite conference. And in that time, it has just proliferated across the Power Platform. It started life in apps, moved on to data, automations, AI, and RPA, and Power Pages just last year. And so you're probably asking, why? What's so special about it? Why is this happening? Well, let's dive into the characteristics of PowerFX, what makes it so special to help answer this question as to why it is proliferating across the Power Platform at the rate that it is. Now, before I get into these traits that make PowerFX so incredibly unique and special, I want you to keep this idea in the back of your mind. This is the unifying theory for PowerFX and what makes it so incredibly sticky. PowerFX is designed for anyone to be able to pick it up, learn it, and be productive with it fast. Again, it's designed to be easy to learn so that you can go from knowing nothing about it to being productive with it very quickly. So that's the unifying theory. Let's dive down a deeper level and explore these traits that make PowerFX unique among software development languages. Now, to start with, PowerFX is open source. Now, those of you who have been in the Microsoft ecosystem for a while, guys like Aiden, who have 20 plus years experience with with Dynamics, are probably thinking, open source from Microsoft? Are you joking? Those of you who are newer to the Microsoft ecosystem might not understand why this is such a big deal. Prior to Satya Nadella taking over as CEO about a decade ago, Microsoft was an anything but open source type of organization. In fact, they were so opposed to it that their former CEO referred to open source software as a form of cancer. And yet, in the decade since Nadella took over as CEO, Microsoft have completely changed their thinking regarding open source software and really embraced it. And the fact that PowerFX was released as open source is testament to just how much Microsoft's thinking has changed when it comes to open source. You can go to GitHub today where you can interact with the PowerFX repo. Now, this conveys a number of advantages on PowerFX. We can interact with the source code and the dev team via GitHub. We can interact with the team that's building this at Microsoft. Now, this is unique because generally speaking, access to the product team is limited to MVPs and whatnot. And yet through GitHub, anyone can interact with the team that's developing this at Microsoft, as well as with the wider community. And as a result, we get new features and functions developed faster because we can submit ideas and things that we'd like to see in PowerFX to the dev team. We also get faster bug fixes through the community. Just as a case in point, last year I was having an issue with something that I'm going to demo to you in a little bit, and some issues around dates, and I submitted it through GitHub to the PowerFX team, and a fellow community member in the UK, someone I had never met before, just a fellow enthusiast, answered my question, solved my problem. And so through the community, we're able to quickly solve problems as well. So this open source nature makes the development process for PowerFX and the adoption much faster. You've also got the ability to create your own functions. You can branch the source code and create things that you'd like to see in PowerFX and either submit them to the dev team for approval, or if you have some esoteric use case, something that really only applies to your organization, You can create that and use it in your environment with PowerFX. Basically, PowerFX benefits from Linus's law. It's this idea that comes from Linus Torvald, the creator of Linux, that given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. And PowerFX benefits from that effect. But the fact that it's open source alone doesn't explain PowerFX's growth. The next trait is that it's strongly typed. Now, if you've ever worked in Canvas apps and tried to put two things together that Canvas apps didn't like, you may be familiar with seeing an error like this in the IntelliSense. What this means is that the guardrails and training wheels have been built into PowerFX to address potential issues and hit them off during development and not at runtime. As Shane Young of PowerApps 911 is fond of saying, PowerApps wants what it wants, which is a more elegant way of saying that these training wheels and guardrails are built into it. This makes it easy for anyone from pro devs to makers to quickly learn it. And again, classic example, trying to combine mismatched data types, it's not going to let you do that. Let's dive into that a little further. So let's say that we've got text and an integer that we want to add together. We've got a number 1 that's formatted as a string, and we've got a number 1 that's formatted as a number. We want to add 1 plus 1, and we expect that to equal 2 because that's what 1 plus 1 equals. However, because we have these mismatched data types, we've got a problem. And depending on the software development language that we're using, we could get 3 very different results. In a more weakly typed language, so think your C, C++, as long as your grammar and syntax is correct, you're going to be able to compile and run that code. And you're not going to realize that you've got a problem until you get a nasty error at runtime because it doesn't know what to do. We're trying to put text and a number together and it's not sure what to do. Or in other software development languages that are weakly typed, we may not get an error, but it's going to make an assumption for us. And it's going to say, text and a number, I think what you really meant to do was concatenate. And it's going to give us 11. We didn't get an error, but we still have a problem because 1 plus 1 equals 2, not 11. And so this is where PowerFX being strongly typed benefits us because it's going to say, hey, you've got text and a number. I'm not going to let you go further until you give me 2 numbers or 2 pieces of text to put together so that I know what to do. So that's what it means to be strongly typed. Next, PowerFX is declarative. Software development languages generally come in one of 2 flavors, imperative or declarative. Now, your imperative languages are your more traditional development languages, think .NET, C#. And in an imperative language, you get what you want by specifying how to do it. So let's pop out of the software development world for a minute and let's talk about my other favorite subject, cheeseburgers. Let's say we want a Big Mac from McDonald's. Now, in the imperative world, we can't just ask for a Big Mac. We've got to specify how to do that. And so we've got to give it the recipe. 2 beef patties, special sauce and cheese, all on a sesame seed bun equals a Big Mac. We get what we want by specifying how to do it. Now, this gives us a lot more control over the outcome, but it presents barriers to entry for people who don't come from a computer science background, or it just takes longer to do because we've got to go through this routine to get the Big Mac every time. So now that we're all craving McDonald's, how do declarative languages like PowerFX work? Well, using our analogy, when we're working in PowerFX, if we want a Big Mac, we simply roll up to the drive-thru and ask for it. Run the Big Mac function. We specify what we want, and PowerFX figures out how to do that in the background. Now, this makes it easier and more efficient to develop software because we don't have to tell it how to do things. We just ask for them. And like McDonald's in the real world, we get consistent results. The Big Mac function runs the same way every single time in every context. Whereas if we have to specify the recipe, we might put in a little more beef or a little extra sauce or more cheese, getting fundamentally something a little different. So that's what it means for Power Effects to be declarative. Again, making it easy for people to pick it up and be effective with it fast. Next, Power Effects is always live. With your traditional software development languages, you need to write your code, then you compile your code before you ever run the code to see what it's actually doing. In Power Effects, it compiles incrementally. So in near real time, we see what it does. Basically, just like an Excel spreadsheet, whenever we make a change to our Power Effects function, we instantly see what it does. This makes it fast to learn it because the feedback loops are shorter. We're instantly seeing what happens. And then finally, Power Effects is one language to rule them all. What do I mean by that? Well, when you're working in Power Effects, it's actually compiling to different backends depending on the context that you're in. For example, if you're working in Power Apps, what's actually happening is it's compiling JavaScript in the background. Now, you don't see that and you don't care about that because you just see the Power Effects in your Power App, but that's what's happening. Similarly, if you're working with, say, formula columns in Dataverse, it's actually compiling to SQL, stored procedures, and things like that. Or if we take the new kid on the block, Power Effects Functions, or the artist formerly known as low-code plugins, it's compiling .NET. These are three separate development languages that are often maintained by three different teams or devs. A full stack dev will work across all three, but on large complex biz apps projects, generally speaking, these are going to be three different devs. And yet, when I'm working in Power Effects, I use the same commands in the same way, and it's smart enough to know to compile to JavaScript for an app, SQL for a formula column, or .NET for a Power Effects function.
Hey, Nathan, can I interrupt you for a question?
Sure.
All right, Jose, if you want, go ahead. I'm sorry, we got you muted still.
Sorry, can you hear me? Testing 1, 2, testing.
Yep.
Okay, is this Power Effects? Is it a wrapper around another language like C# or JavaScript or something, or what?
Exactly. Yep.
So how does it work? How is it wrapping around JavaScript and then C#, or how is it doing that?
That's a really good question. I'd have to do a bit of research to get back to you on that. So, yeah, yeah. Let me get back to you on that one.
Thank you.
But yeah, it's an abstraction level away from the code that's being compiled on the back end. So yeah, so that's why I say it's one language to rule them all, because again, three different languages all use the same Power Effects expressions on the front end. And so as a result, we've seen this absolutely proliferate across the Power Platform. And in 3 years, it started out life in Power Apps and Canvas apps specifically. It then came to custom pages and modern commanding. And then a couple years ago, it made the jump to Dataverse and we got calculated columns. These are all GA today. You can use them in prod. And then since then, it has just gone crazy across the Power Platform. About 18 months ago, we got Power Effects Functions, or again, the artist formerly known as low-code plugins. This is in private preview today. We then got the command line interface. It came to Power Automate Desktop, Power Pages, and Copilot Studio. So these are all the places where you can use Power Effects on the Power Platform today. And so with that, let's get hands-on and see this in action on the Power Platform. So I'm going to take you through Dataverse Actions, Copilot Studio, Power Pages, and the command line interface. We won't get into Power Automate Desktop as I'm not really an RPA guy, so that's not really my background, but we'll go through these four things. So let me pop out of the... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, can I jump in with another question?
Yeah.
Mark, please go ahead. You are also muted.
I'm sorry. Are you saying that Power FX can replace what currently has to be done in plugins? Did I hear that right?
Yep. So it's still a preview feature. It's in private preview, but it can produce synchronous business logic that you would write C# for today.
Oh, cool. I think I just became a coder. I didn't know that. I've always told people I'm not a coder, but I've been doing Excel for like
This is
20
the
years.
thing, man. Exactly. You just made my point. I need Mark, you can take over the presentation, man. You just made my point for me. I love it. Yeah, so what I'm going to show you are the instant plugins. There is an automated variety, but at the moment the instant ones are what's in private preview and what they're progressing with. So let me open up my browser and let's get into it. So we'll start with Dataverse Actions. So we're going to come here to the Dataverse Accelerator app, and I'm going to show you one that I created. This is one that I created with James Williams, the gentleman I mentioned previously, who helped me out with my time and date issues through GitHub. But I created this plugin because pretty much on every project ever, we have a requirement to calculate working days. How many non-weekend, non-holidays are there between two dates? And what's really cool about this is I can create this once using PowerFX and then reuse it across the Power Platform as need be. And so what I've got here is I've got input and output parameters for my plugin. So in the background, this is actually creating a custom API and compiling C#. But I need some input parameters. So obviously we need a start and an end date to calculate our working days. And then I'm going to use an API to get public holidays. And so I need a country code because I need to specify the country that I want to get the public holidays for, and as well as a county code. Now, this is something in the US, this isn't so much of a thing, but in places like New Zealand, Australia, and the UK, we have regional holidays. And so I need to specify a location because there are public holidays that apply to people in one part of the country, but not in the other. So I need to take these 4 input parameters. I'm going to run this, and then it's going to give me my working days as a number. But let's get into the PowerFX expressions and see what it's doing. So the first thing I need to do, and that's what's happening here, is I need to dynamically create a table of dates between my start and end date. So I want to dynamically create that, and that's what I'm going to do here using my for all and sequence. And it's just going to go through this, and it's going to give me a range of dates between the start and end. The next thing I need to do is I need to call my API and get my public holidays. Now, this is a unique feature of PowerFX functions because when you're writing plugins with C#, you've got to create connection strings and deal with client secrets and all of that. PowerFX functions just use your Power Platform connectors. And so any connector that you use in Canvas apps, Power Automate, is available to you here. And so you just hook up to it and get the data you need. And so there's a custom connector in the Power Platform that pings public holidays. And what I've got to do here is I've actually got to get public holidays for each year that's in my date range. Because think about it, if I need to get something over the holiday period, say December and January, I need to get public holidays for, say, 2024 and 2025. And so that's what's going on here. Once I've got that, now I can start doing stuff to get my number of working days. And so what we're going to do is, firstly, we need to work out how many non-weekend days are in my range of dates. And there's a great function in PowerFX called weekday, and it lets us get those days. Now, in that function, we can specify which day the week starts on. If you don't specify it, it's going to default to Sunday. However, by specifying Monday, it's going to each day of the week gets a number, and so we can say any day that is less than the value of 6 is a weekday, 1 through 5, and we're going to count those. So we get our number of weekdays. The next thing we need to do is we need to get our number of public holidays that show up from this API. And so we're going to say, based on global, which is all of the public holidays that apply to everybody in the specified country, or the county, which is the location that we specify within the country, find any public holidays in the date range, and then it's simple subtraction. Subtract holidays from weekdays and we get our working days. So this is just an example of how you can use Power Effects in the Power Platform to generate business logic in a synchronous manner, replacing traditional plugins that you would write. Now, because this is a custom API behind the scenes, this can be called everywhere from Canvas apps to Power Automate to Copilot Studio. So you can write logic once and then reuse it across the Power Platform. So let's see it in action. We'll come over here to the API Playground. This is a new testing mechanism that they gave us. There we go. All right, so I'm going to put in the dates that I've been away from New Zealand on my travels. So I departed on the 18th of December, and I get back on the 17th of January. And I'm going to say New Zealand, and then I'm going to put in the code. This is the API's code for Auckland, which is where I reside in New Zealand. So this is going to give us the number of working days between the 18th of December 24, 17th of Jan 25 for Auckland, New Zealand. So let's go ahead and run this. Now, when it's done running, it should tell us that there are 19 working days. And it did. Now, I'm not going to grab the calendar and bore you, but if you do want to fact check me, you're welcome to go take a look at a calendar. And you should see that there are, in fact, 19 working days between these two dates in Auckland, New Zealand. So this is an example of how Power Effects can be used to work in automation and do some business logic behind the scenes. This is a new feature. It's still in private preview, but I would expect to start seeing more about this in the coming months. So that's Dataverse Actions. Let's move on to Copilot Studio. So in Copilot Studio, we can use Power Effects to interact with our data and create a richer experience, give some personality and flair to our bots. And so this is just a really simple Copilot I created, and it checks the weather. And if I come in here to my action that I've created that's checking the weather, give this a second to load. I'm going to come down here. Get rid of that. There we go. To my response that's coming from this action, you can see that I can specify the data that's coming into the response. And I've got variables that are coming from the API call to MSN Weather. And then I'm using Power Effects here, because what I want to do is I want to ask, do I need to wear a sweater? And so I'm using Power Effects to make that determination. And I'm just using a really simple if formula. And so I'm basically saying, if the temperature is above 18 degrees Celsius, that's about 64 Fahrenheit, then we won't need a sweater. Otherwise, we will. And so that's what this Power Effects expression is doing here. So it's interacting with my data that's coming from MSN Weather, and then just providing a bit of personality and flair to my Copilot. Now, as a quick aside, when you're using Power Effects in Copilot Studio, think email template. The first time I was working with this, I created the entire thing as an interpolated string, and I got something that didn't quite make sense. And so think email template. You'll hard code in the weather for, and then you'll drop in your Power Effects expressions that are doing things with your data in between those hard coded responses. All right, let's see this thing in action. So let's ask, do I need to wear a sweater? So this is going to prompt me for a city. And let's choose Washington, D.C. Helps if you spell it right. All right, so it is 3 degrees Celsius in Washington, D.C. That's a little bit above freezing. I think it's probably colder than that now. But we're definitely going to need a sweater in Washington, D.C. today because it's cold. Let's try it again for a more balmy location. Let's see if we need a sweater where Depeche is in Auckland. Again, it's going to prompt us for a city. And so let's say Auckland. And it is a balmy 25 degrees Celsius in Auckland. That's about 75 Fahrenheit. So Depeche, we are all super peanut butter and jealous of you right now, mate, as you do not need a sweater, but we all do here in the Northern Hemisphere. So that's Power Effects working in Copilot Studio. There's one more thing I want to show you. I discovered this yesterday. I was hoping to have a working demo, but unfortunately, I'm still getting my head around it. But if we come into agent, so what I just showed you was a copilot. We'll move on to an autonomous agent. And this is where we can give instructions for an agent to reason over it and go do stuff. And this is one I created to generate Power Effects formulas for me, which works, which is kind of cool. But if we click here to edit and come into the instructions, we can insert Power Effects formulas and functions into the instructions for our agent, which is really cool. Now, I still haven't been able to quite get this to work for me. So firstly, I'm trying to come up with an idea of what you would do with it just to get it to work. But I think that is absolutely cool that agents can use Power Effects expressions. So potentially, if you've got data that they're looking at or a document they're looking at, you could say, if it's greater than this or less than that, do one or the other, that type of thing. That's kind of how I suspect you would use it. But I'm very keen to keep banging away at this to work out how you can use it to get a working demo for you all sometime in the near future. But I did want to highlight this because I think that is very cool. All right, that's Copilot Studio. Let's move on to the new kid on the block, which is Power Pages. This was just announced at Build in May of 2024. And what's really cool is we can start to use Power Effects to replace some of the JavaScripting that we've had to do in Power Pages. I've always said Power Pages is simultaneously the most low-code part of the Power Platform that ultimately becomes one of the most pro-code parts of it, because you can literally click a button to get a working portal that interacts with Dataverse, but by the end of it, you generally are writing code to do all the things that the client actually needs it to do. But the fact that we can use Power Effects is starting to reduce that. And so there's a few places where we can use it. So this is a very simple portal that I've stood up. I'm not a massive Power Pages guy, but I was able to stand this up for experimental purposes. And the first thing we can do is we can use Power Effects to manipulate text blocks. And so what I've done is I've put in a simple interpolated string, and I'm just counting rows of a table that I've created called Power Pages Tests and sticking that number in here. And so that's one way that I'm using Power Effects. The next thing I'm doing is I can dynamically change labels on buttons. So if we come here to button text, and I am playing a basic game of Fizz Buzz, and I am counting the rows of my Power Pages tests, and if it's an odd number, I'm labeling the button Fizz, and if it's an even number, I'm labeling it Buzz. And so I can dynamically change that based on underlying data. So I can change labels for buttons, and I can do the same with content and images as well. So this is an image that I am dynamically swapping, again, just playing a bit of Fizz Buzz. And if it's an even number, I show this gorgeous image of New Zealand scenery. I think that's somewhere in the South Island. And if it's an odd number, I swap it to a picture of Auckland at night. The last place that you can use Power Effects in Power Pages is with iframes. This is something I just discovered the other day, and you can use Power Effects with iframes. So if we come here to the iframe URL, it says it supports Power Effects, and this is going to show us our formula. And again, just using the same concept of counting these rows to dynamically change it based on whether it's an odd or an even number. If it's an odd number, I've basically embedded my Power Pages site in itself. And if it's an even number, I have embedded the Power Pages management app. I'd hoped to use an external website like Bing, but I was getting an error. I think there's some security setting that I'm missing. But at least I've got a working demo. So let's preview this and see it in action. All right, so you can see that I've got my Power Pages Management app embedded here, and let's go to the home page. So we've got an even number of test tables. So our label is Buzz. We've got 42 of them, and we've got this picture of gorgeous New Zealand scenery, and our embedded iframe is the Power Pages Management app. So let's go ahead and change that. So let's add another test row. Let's add this. All right, and we'll click home to refresh. And you can see that it's changed. So we've now got 43 test tables. That's an odd number. So our label on this button has changed from Buzz to Fizz. Our image has changed to this image of Auckland at night. And if we come here to our iframe, you can see that it's changed to show the Power Page embedded in itself. So we go. So let's come down here and let's add another test table row. Change it back. Home. And you can see we've now got an even number. Fizz has changed back to Buzz. The image of Auckland has changed back to this image of South Island scenery, and our embedded iframe has changed back to the Power Pages Management app. So those are the 4 places you can use Power Effects and Power Pages today. Now, if you were doing this in the real world, you would probably use parameters like the logged in user, who are they, where are they located, what's their company, what's their tier in our membership loyalty plan, something like that to change content and data that they're seeing. But it is very cool that we can do that in a low code way without having to write a lot of JavaScript and whatnot. So that is Power Pages. All right, sorry about that. Let's wrap this up with the command line interface. So I'm going to pop over to VS Code and show you how you can use Power Effects to work with Dataverse in a command line. All right, so to access this, we simply type in pack power-fx REPL, and this is going to bring up the Power Effects command line for us. Now, the prerequisite for this is you do need to install Power Platform tools into VS Code, but once you do, you can now use Power Effects to manipulate data in Dataverse. And so firstly, let's just type in help, and this is going to show us all the Power Effects commands that are available to us. And so you can see there is quite a lot that's available to us. Now, I just learned how to do this last year. Some of you may know Rami Munla, who's a fellow MVP based in Wellington, New Zealand. He showed me this. Before he showed me this, I thought CLI was a detective series on Netflix. That's how low code I am. And now I am completely sold on the CLI. I absolutely love this thing. I use it to get my head around new Power Effects functions, and we can use it to manipulate and work with data. So the first thing I'm going to show you is my random name generator. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I have to come up with test data, I really struggle to come up with it. I pretty much run out of names of family members and pets pretty quickly. And so what I did was I've created a way to randomly generate names. Let me pop over to my model-driven app real quick. And in my model-driven app, I've created 2 tables, one called first name and one called last name. And I've populated them with the 500 most common first and last names on planet Earth, according to a Google search that I did. And so then what I'm going to do is to generate a name is I've got an interpolated string, and it's going to query, well, not query, but it's going to pull a random name from each of these tables. And so what I've done is for the first name, I'm using a function called shuffle. Think shuffling a deck of cards. It's just going to randomly shuffle that up. And then I have wrapped a first function around that, and that's just going to grab the first record it finds. So shuffle the deck of cards, grab the first one. And I'm going to do that for both the first and the last names. So let's go ahead and run this and see what it does. And you can see it's given us a random name. Do it one more time. and it's generated a random name for us. Now we can do other things with the CLI as well. So we can do things like, say, get counts of data. So let's count the rows in our first name table. And in fact, we do have 500 rows in that table. We can create data as well. So using collect, which if you're familiar with Canvas apps, that lets you dynamically create a table in Dataverse in the CLI, this actually creates a row for us. And so I've got a table called test tables because I can't spell chrysanthemum. And we're going to create a test table. And for the name, what I want to do is I want to name it test table and append that with the number of rows in the table. And so I'm using a count rows in this interpolated string within this collect statement. So let's go ahead and run this and see what it does. So it's going to go ahead and create a row, and you can see that it's created test table 212, and it's given us the ID for the record. Let's go into our model-driven app and just validate that it's there. And you can see we've just created test table 212 from the command line interface. We can also update data as well. And so what I'm going to do in this expression is I want to update the Nathan Rose record, and I want to upgrade my last name. I don't want to be Rose. I want to be Nathan Awesome Rose. And so what this is going to do is it's going to look up contact with the last name of Rose, and then it's going to update that last name to Awesome Rose. So let's go ahead and run this. Actually, first let's just come over here to. So this is the record I'm going to update. Let's go ahead and do that. So it's going to look up the record, update it. You can see it's done that. Let's come back here and refresh. And you can see that I'm now Nathan Awesome Rose.
Hey, Nathan.
And that, yo. Yep.
So, Nathan, sorry for maybe
go for it.
I missed this part somehow. All the code that you're writing from an application lifecycle management standpoint, like where are we committing this code to in a repo or someplace, and how are we using it?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. So definitely something to be considered as the stuff moves towards production. Because it all, with the exception of the CLI that I'm showing you now, the rest of it all lives in Power Platform land in the Maker portal. And so the idea of having to commit to a source code repo isn't quite as much of a thing. But in terms of the CLI, probably more than I guess source code ALM type stuff, you probably want to be thinking more along the lines of governance and control. Because as you can see, I can do a lot in Dataverse just from the CLI, and in production, this could be a very bad thing. So it's really cool in demo environments, but again, in prod, you definitely wouldn't want that happening. So, Jose, you got your hand up?
Yes, two things. One, how are you hitting the client through VS Code? If I would imagine you'd have to give it like a password, or like you'd have to give it credentials, right?
Yep. Yeah. So it's logged in up here. It's logged in as me, and it does that through the Power Platform tools.
So you
this one.
I see.
It's got an auth profile. Yep.
Okay, cool. And then secondly, like what came to my mind immediately is being able to pull like data from a database, like an ERP tool, right? Like pulling the data using something like Python and like SQL Alchemy, and then moving it into here, and then manipulating the data through here. Or alternatively, like I would think you could also like move that data to like some warehouse in like Fabric or I don't know what products there are for like warehousing, but I would imagine you can like clone the DB onto Fabric or what have you, and then manipulate it through the Power app or the Power platform, right? Is that possible?
Yeah, you definitely could. I like that. Yeah. So let me show you. There's another function. So what I've shown you is just PowerFX REPL. There is another expression called PowerFX run, and what that lets us do is run more complex PowerFX expressions. So so this is one that I've created to create 5 test records based on my random first and last names, and then sticking in random addresses, creating a random mobile phone number, and then creating an email address based on that random name that I've created. And so where this would be valuable is if you were spinning up a new environment and you wanted to have test data seeded into it. You could have files like this run as part of a process that spins up a new environment. But you could also, to your question, Jose, is you could potentially have a file like this that runs PowerFX on Dataverse. So if you've got data that you've brought into Dataverse from, say, an ERP or another source, you could then run a series of PowerFX commands on it from the CLI if you wanted to. So let me show you how that works. So I'm just going to pop out of this. Oops, if you spell it right. And I'm going to go to pack power fx run. And so what this needs is it needs a file. It's going to default to the environment that I'm logged into unless I specify otherwise. And then if I put an echo, it's going to show me what it's actually going to do. And so this is going to, so let's run this. It's going to create these 5 test records for me. So I'm going to say pack power fx run, and then I'm going to put in file pfx test1.txt. You can specify the directory. Mine is defaulting to my OneDrive, and I wasn't quite sure how to change it. So that's where it's defaulting. And then I'm going to put in echo so that it'll play these commands back to me. So let's go ahead and run that. I missed something. Let's try it again. Okay, there we go. It's connecting. And I'll take a few seconds here to whip through this. So this is the expression it's going to run. And it should let me know when it's done. There we go. So we've got the IDs and names for the records that it's created. So let me pop over to the model-driven app and just go to my contacts. And so you can see these are the 5 test records that it's just created for us. And so it's given it a random name. It's given it an email address based on that random name that we've created. It's given it a random phone number and a New Zealand format. And it's created a random address for us based on what we've specified in the file. So that's how you can run more complex instructions through the command line interface with PowerFX. So if you're spinning up a new environment, or if you've got data that's coming in from another source that you then want to manipulate and do stuff on, this is one way that you could do it. So that's the demo. Let me pop back into the presentation. All right, so we've gone through Dataverse Actions, or the artist formerly known as low-code plugins, Copilot Studio, Power Pages, and the command line interface. And I am absolutely hypnotized by PowerFX. I'm not sure if you guys are as well. And so that brings us to the end of our time together. So we've seen that, like hip hop in the 1970s, Power Effects is growing absolutely like crazy while no one's looking. And like hip hop, it's doing that because it's democratized the creation of software. Hip hop democratized the creation of music. All you needed was a turntable and a mic. Power Effects is doing the same in the world of Power Platform because all you need to know is how to use Excel. And it's made it easy for anyone from pro devs to makers to create on the Power Platform. So thank you all so much for your time, for your attention, for your questions. And yeah, happy to take any additional questions that anyone might have.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathan.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, I'm curious if there are any areas, so it's kind of a two-part question, if there are any areas where you'd love to see it or where, where it doesn't exist now, or where you think it really needs it.
Yep. Yeah, easy one. So where I absolutely think Power Effects would be a killer would be client-side and model-driven apps. So there was, I don't know if you saw kind of 2-3 years ago, there was something in the docs about being able to use Power Effects in business rules, and then it just kind of disappeared. And so I'm guessing they ran into trouble with trying to develop it, but I would love to be able to customize model-driven apps with Power Effects because that would replace a lot of the scripting that we have to do today.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yep.
Awesome. Does anybody else have questions for Nathan? Feel free to come off mute and ask.
Yeah, I've not done a lot with cards, Ed. But yeah, that's that is. Do you have anything you can share in terms of what you've been doing with it? Because yeah, I've not done much with that.
Oh yeah, cards for Power Apps. When it comes to typically we're doing adaptive cards within Power Automate, you go into the studio and you'd build that big long JSON payload, and then you'd copy and paste it over to Power Automate, and that was great. It worked fine. Problem always been is kind of a pain it took us. Where are you at in that big long JSON payload? So a beautiful part about cards for Power Apps is you are building the same exact JSON payload just using Power FX. And not only are you able to do it via that way, but when you build it, it stays within a solution. So you can call it and then you can do everything with ALM. It's a beautiful way of simplifying that. Now, there are some nuances still to deal with it, but it is a much, much easier way of getting adaptive cards built with Power FX.
Yeah, cool. I'll have to give that a try.
I just want to say, all you coders out there, I'm coming for your plugins.
I love it. I love it.
All right, awesome. Well, good.
Yeah, Mark, you'll find that you can create plugin logic just like you would in Excel. It's fascinating. It's really cool. So what you need to do is go into the Maker portal, and there's an app called the Dataverse Accelerator app. If it is not in your environment, it comes default in newly spun up environments. If it's not there, you can go to App Source and download it.
Cool. Thanks. This is very exciting. It's been a great 90 minutes for me.
Ah, cool. Glad it was helpful. And yeah, if you get stuck on anything, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I have done a lot with the low code plugins and would be happy to help.
All right, wonderful. Well, everybody, thank you for joining. Nathan, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you all for having me.
Yeah, very high expectations, and you continually exceed them. So thank you. Learned a lot today. I'm really excited to get some time to work with this. It's very cool. Everybody, thank you for joining. Really appreciate your time again. We're going to have a meeting next month. Still finalizing the topic. We're looking to have something Power BI specific for Dataverse, but stay tuned. Please enjoy your month. Enjoy your time off in the winter or summer where you may live, and have a great day. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.